Okay, we're ready. Okay, thank you. I just want to say thank you for those of you who showed up today for the budget roadshow between myself and my colleague here. For the record, for all of you, I'm Representative Cobb. I'm your state representative for this district, and I represent Mojave and La Paz County. I'm also appropriations chair. So what we're doing today is just pretty much, and I will let my colleague first introduce himself.
Thank you, Representative. My name is the Director of the Arizona Governor's Office of Strategic Planning and Budgeting, and our job is to put together an executive budget, to present it to the legislature, to negotiate with our separate and co-equal branch of government, and then ultimately secure passage of a budget, and then we go into implementation of it.
And so what we wanted to do today was just to bring to you what we've done this last year and kind of give oversight of what it means to your community. And we've been doing this at a few other communities, and we're trying to get around to most of the communities in the state. So for one thing, but this session, I just kind of want to bring out this session, what we've done this session. I call it a perfect storm, and it wasn't perfect. What it was such a difficult session because it was the third longest session in the state's history. And the reason for that is because of a couple of things. One is we had a 31-29 split in the House and a 16-14 split in the Senate, which made everybody the last vote, and they all thought they were the governor. You know, so they all wanted to be that last vote. That was one difficulty we had. Another is that we did a hybrid, and I think that created apathy amongst some of the members, and so it was difficult sometimes to even get a quorum onto the floor. So with that, the fact that we had two sessions in one, I think was just the perfect storm that created a long session. And sometimes we forget about what we got done at the beginning of session because the end of session was so long. So you want to go ahead and get started on some of the highlights of what we've been doing?
Absolutely. And we're going to play a video that was produced by the governor. So it's heavily focused on Governor Ducey signing this bill or announcing that program. But I don't think any of this would have been possible without the partnership with Representative Cobb, Senator Gowan, Speaker Bowers, and President Fan, legislative champions who worked with us to get a lot of successes accomplished for the people of the state of Arizona, and a lot of accomplishments in this last session. So we're going to roll the footage and then I think talk about some of the financial pieces of this session.
When Matt gets us started, I just wanted to say Chairman Gowan, Senator Gowan, usually does this with us, and he couldn't make it today. So it's the duo instead of the trio today. Go ahead.
I think they're going to adjust the volume, I think, for a second.
That's coming on. Still pretty low. Let me see if I could put my microphone over there. No, that's not.
Well, I think while we're getting the technology queued, I think we can kind of move into some of the pieces of the 2022 budget at a glance. Tax relief was one of the central components of, I think, this legislative session. The governor ran in 2014 to reduce the Arizona individual income tax to as close to zero as possible. And I think with this budget passing, we took a major step forward. First of all, we have 4 tax rates. We have a graduated tax rate system in Arizona. We're collapsing that down into one single rate. So we have 4 rates being collapsed down to one rate over the course of the next 2 years. And we're keeping Arizona's tax rate competitive from the perspective of the top rate is going to remain where it is today.
Loss, worry, and disruption.
There it is.
There it is. We got it.
All right.
In a time of trial, loss, worry, and disruption, we kept our bearings and never lost heart. It's been one of those turns in life when perseverance makes all the difference, when we had to show just how resilient we are.
Now to the state of education. Arizona making headlines, becoming the latest state to allow community colleges to offer 4-year degrees in certain high-demand fields.
Doug Ducey signed a $100 million wildfire relief bill.
But you will soon be able to order cocktails to go in Arizona.
Yeah, today Governor Doug Ducey signed the bill allowing bars, liquor stores, and other restaurants to sell cocktails to go.
Governor Ducey making big changes to unemployment benefits.
He is cutting the federal stipend and now giving people a $2,000 bonus to return to work.
Border apprehensions are at their highest level in 15 years. Our Republican governor is the first governor in the country to send troops to the border.
We need resources for the National Guard. They need to change the communication to the nation of Mexico. The Biden administration has been anti-wall and AWOL.
A governor elected 7 years ago on a pledge to cut tax rates as close to zero as possible, his words, is getting awfully close to zero.
Tell us about the new Arizona flat tax, please.
For the largest tax decrease in state history, Arizona has the lowest flat tax in the nation at 2.5%.
And in the Capitol Watch this afternoon, Governor Ducey making a major step today to keep critical race theory out of Arizona schools.
The governor also issuing a new executive order that bans vaccine passports here in Arizona.
Governor Ducey signed an amended tribal gaming compact. It includes legislation authorizing legal sports betting in Arizona.
With resilience and compassion, we move forward, allowing nothing to get in our way and showing the best kind of unity there is, of caring about one another.
As you can see, it did highlight quite a bit of what Matt was just starting to talk about on the flat tax. Something that happened that is not even part of our budget, so I just want to mention it, and Governor Ducey mentioned it at the end, was signing the gaming compact. That happened so far back that I thought it was last session. So go ahead on to finish the tax, about the taxes.
Well, just a bit ago, we heard a big rumble or something. Someone had fallen down. I think that was both of us after this session ended. It tied for the third longest session in state history, 171
days.
171 days.
Yes.
Typically, sessions are around the 60 to 90 days, maybe 100, when you get.
And we're constitutionally, we're supposed to be at a 100-day session, but we can extend that if we want to, and we did this year, obviously, because we needed it. So yeah, it was definitely hellacious. And probably the number one thing and when I talked about the perfect storm, the other thing is trying to get this tax package passed. That was the other part of this perfect storm, I think, that created the length of the time of the session also.
You had a number of different scenarios here. You had the COVID-19 pandemic and the economic uncertainty that situation brought. And then on the other hand, you had a massive infusion of federal stimulus dollars into the state, which affected kind of the fundamentals of the economy to figure out what was organic, real economic growth versus kind of that artificial stimulus, trying to tease out all of that. But we had a $4 billion surplus going into session. We thought we were going to be upside down by $1.5 billion just 6.5 months prior to the start of the legislative session. So a lot of things were up in the air, and what made the tax package possible was one, a common understanding that Arizona has to be kept competitive. If we're going to continue to be the destination state in the country, you have to have a competitive tax structure for businesses and for families coming to move here. Proposition 208, it's otherwise known as the Invest in Ed proposition that passed last November, was going to raise taxes by over 78%, and significantly affecting small businesses. I know we have a representative from the chamber here. We know that 43% of all the jobs in Arizona are attributed to small businesses. And we all believed at the Capitol that this would crush the economic momentum that we've seen over the last 7 years. So what we did is install a flat tax of 2.5%, plus we put a cap, the max rate that you can charge in the state of Arizona at 4.5%, which is our current top marginal tax rate, while at the same time funding many of these initiatives that the Invest in Ed proposition sought to do. We also worked, as you know, that legislating requires compromise and coming together, and we worked, I see folks here from the cities and the county, in terms of urban shared revenue. So cities in particular get to share in some of the income tax collections that we have. Right now it was at 15%, and there was a concern among our cities and towns that lowering taxes might affect their bottom line. Now, we believed that this was the kind of fuel for economic growth to continue to have Arizona as a pace setter, but we also recognized some serious concerns that cities and towns had, and we had to raise the share of the income tax collections from 15% to 18% by fiscal year 2024. So it's a lot of factors at play. As you know, policymaking can be very complicated. There are multiple stakeholders involved, and we sought to try to address as many as possible while keeping our eye on the prize, which was a competitive flat tax, the lowest flat tax in the country.
There are a couple other pieces on the tax package that I think Matt's going to talk about, but when he's talking about going from 15 to 18% for the cities, it's all about compromise. And that was a compromise for us to be able to keep the eye on the prize. And that went a long way, I think, with the cities, and I think that they're going to do much better than they really expected that they were going to do. But we also, the property tax, talk about that.
Absolutely. So we have various different categories of property taxes in the state, depending on what kind of property you have, whether it's agriculture, that's taxed at one rate. Residential property, your house, that's taxed at one rate. Rental property is taxed at one rate. Commercial property, taxed at 18%. The commercial property tax ratio, 18%, one of the highest in the West. And so what we sought to do was lower that from 18% to 16%, one of the most significant drops in commercial property tax rates in recent Arizona history, while at the same time holding our residential homeowners mitigating that impact and insulating them from the shift in property taxes, because land is finite and you have certain different parcels and they all have to generate a certain amount of revenue. So if you lower one rate, all of the other rates have to come up. And what we sought to do is the state came in and took care of the rate impact to our residential homeowners, covering 50% of the property tax
As
bill.
most of you know, it's like a balloon. You push one area and it gets bigger in one area and smaller in another. And that's kind of what we wanted to do, is make sure it didn't impact them. So we are giving a 50% rebate, homeowner rebate, to mitigate that. And we feel like that this is, again, making us more competitive, because when he's talking about we're one of the highest tax rates in the West, every state around us is lower, including California.
Two other really big accomplishments we thought with this tax package, and it really has been, it was the toughest part of securing the budget deal with so many stakeholders involved, but two really big wins: helping our charities, increasing the tax deduction that Arizonans can take when they donate to their nonprofits doing amazing work throughout Arizona. And then also veterans. We are going to fully exempt the pension income that veterans have earned from state income tax, so that they can keep more of their money that they earned serving and sacrificing on behalf of the country. And that will result in an additional $650 a year that veterans get to keep and to also reinvest back into the community. So that's the tax package. Now, we also included some other really good financial measures here: $2 billion in state debt that we paid down, $1 billion of recessionary debt where we sold off our state capital to make ends meet in 2010. And we took out $1.4 billion, and we'd pay it back over 20 years. Well, we're paying it off 10 years early. We're also paying down pension debt for public safety and for our correctional officers. We had a pension liability of $900 million for our troopers, about $400 million for our correctional officers, reducing that significantly in a meaningful way that, again, saves taxpayers money and shores up these benefits that our public safety officials have earned.
And the other piece that we did was to pay it off the rollovers. We did a significant down payment on paying off rollovers. We've been doing that for the last 2 years, but we did a significant amount for education, paying off rollover debt. Some of the debt, we really had a hard time finding debt besides our rollovers and the pensions. Those are because we've been trying to keep our debt down. If you think of where we were at from 2015 to 2009, and I know the governor's office had this line. It said, we started out in 2015 $1 billion in debt, and we have $1 billion in the rainy day fund. Well, that was what we had. Plus, we had almost a $4 billion surplus this year. And so we're going to be continuing this uptick in growth and advancement in the state going into next year. So this doesn't stop at this point. And we want to make sure that some of the things that we do policy-wise continue on with that. So we were able to do a lot with our debt this year.
Now, moving on to criminal justice, I think the big theme around criminal justice this legislative session was about recidivism reduction. What kinds of services can we provide to those who are incarcerated that will allow them, upon their release, to get that real second chance? We're talking about substance abuse counseling. We're talking about educational services and many of these other supports that we know work, because once someone is remanded to custody and they enter a prison, things can drastically shift in their likelihood to recidivate again. And some of the bright spots that we've seen in the criminal justice space over the last couple of years has been on the county level. The counties have really been doing some amazing work, and I don't know if you want to talk about that.
I see Supervisor Angus shaking her head, because her and I had very long conversations, and often, I should say, about this issue. One criminal justice piece is a program called Reach Out, and it was started in Yavapai County. And what I consider this is like a triage. a prisoner would come in and maybe they were coming in for trespassing, and then they would get into the system, and it used to be that they were booked, they'd have to wait, they'd have to go through their, their date with the judge. What this does, it gets them in there and it says, are they truly a criminal, or are they trespassing for another reason? Could they be trespassing because they don't have any life savers, like food, clothing, home, family, someone to take care of them? Or are they mentally ill? Or are they have a substance abuse? What this program does is it gets them into that system right away and says, where do they need to go? Do they need to go to prison, or do they need to go to the mental health? Yavapai been doing this for a couple of years as a pilot program. Sheriff Rhodes has done a phenomenal job there, and this program has proven success, and truly, truly exceptional. So we wanted to expand that to other counties. So we put in money this year to not only help with their database, because they had a database from base up that they created. So we gave them money for a database and how to expand their program a little bit, but other counties to mimic, to actually do this. Your county is one of them. Mojave is going to be one of our first two that are going to be mirroring what Yavapai County's done. And I got to tell you, I worked very hard with Supervisor Angus on this, because she was adamant we are going to be one of the next counties that go through. Now, we do have some ongoing funding also, and with that ongoing funding, other counties can put in grants and try to be the next few counties that are going in. And each year we've given enough money to start out probably 2 counties each year. So we're going to get our 2 up this year, along with the database, and get all that ironed out, and then we'll expand on in the next few years. But what he said, our counties are doing phenomenal things in justice reform.
Another county pilot that is getting started this upcoming year is called the County Probation Success Initiative. And in Arizona, probation is a shared responsibility between the states and the counties, and we both pay 50% for probation officers. This new pilot is going to allow us to incentivize county probation departments based on the revocation of probation. So the fewer people who return back to prison results in counties getting access to more of this incentive funding to do other programs. So I think there's a real big opportunity here in focusing on probation, because once someone who's been released goes back to prison, the cycle begins again. So this is really exciting, and counties are going to be able to take the lead again in innovating some successful ways to really better our probation system. So that's criminal justice. Infrastructure. I've said this a couple of times, but prepare for more orange cones throughout Arizona in a good way. We've included hundreds of millions of dollars for road projects. I know Representative Cobb may want to talk about a few of those specific projects.
Yeah, we invested last year in this community in Kingman. We invested $20 million for the I-40 expansion of that interchange up on that needed to be done so badly, that we've had in the works since 1993. This year, infrastructure was another focus of ours, and we really wanted to work on that. So Highway 95, totally repaving Highway 95. And I appreciate Mr. Guest, because he actually was right there with me, fighting with me to make sure that got completed and made it to the end.
$45 million project.
A $45 million project. On top of that, we have $109 million that is going to go to rural communities, and it's for every poor or fair road within the state system. So any state road that's poor or fair is going to be repaved over this next year, and it's $109 million that on top of what ADOT has already put in. Now, ADOT has their own plans. These are all extra plans. Now, we've got other projects, other little projects that we've been working all the way around the state, that a constituent would come to the members and say, hey, I've seen accidents happen on the 347, Riggs Road. that was one that the last few years we've heard from not just members, but from the people out there that just say, hey, something's got to be done. But it wasn't in ADOT's plan. So those are some of the projects that we took on this year and said, we're going to put extra dollars in to make sure some of these projects get done. The widening of I-10.
The widening of I-10, we're not only going to replace the Gila River Bridge. It's a 2-lane bridge right now. We're going to make that 3 lanes each way. But we're now going to work on expanding several lane miles on both sides of the bridge to begin that work. I mean, it's nearly $1 billion project to take on the entire stretch, but the bridge is going to be incredibly key. One thing I wanted to mention in terms of the pavement preservation, and this was incredibly important to Representative Cobb, is that the pavement preservation dollars are specifically set aside for rural Arizona. These are for roads outside of Maricopa and Pima County, which I think is incredibly important. And what we've heard from a lot of folks is, hey, don't forget about us, you know. And rural Arizona, in many cases, has just, gotten the leftover from what is in the state budget. But this was incredibly important for Representative Cobb and Senator Gowan, and we got significant funding there. Airports as well.
Right, 18 million went into airports, and that'll affect Kingman, it'll affect Bullhead City, it'll affect Havasu, it'll affect pretty much every city within our communities. And honestly, how great is that? 18 million, because we get a 9-to-1 match when we do that. When we put in 18 million, we get a 9-to-1 match back from the federal government. So this is just giving us a little seed money where we can really do some good things. And we've been investing in airports for the last few years, but this was a major investment this year. And I think you'll start seeing that over in your districts and in your cities.
Most of what we do at the Capitol is bipartisan. Nearly everything we do at the Capitol is bipartisan. And one example of working together was on wildfires. We had a severe wildfire season this year. And the governor called the speaker and the president, Leader Rios, who's the Democratic leader in the Senate, and Leader Bolding, the Democratic leader in the House, to get together and come up with a solution on how we can address the wildfire issues. We called a special session and passed a $100 million package. $75 million going to addressing actual fire suppression costs, fighting those fires. There is post-fire flooding mitigation work that needs to occur. There will be a grant program that's established to allow for private and public landowners to get funding to repair their facilities damaged from wildfires. So and it's also going to allow us to be better prepared next fire season, to pre-position assets so that we can call on them in a more urgent fashion to address these wildfires. Now, we know, and as was broken this week, that the federal government is initiating Tier 2.
Yep.
We're going into the Tier 2 levels for Lake Mead. We're going to continue to be in a drier environment. We're going to continue to see wildfires. But one of the really innovative pieces that we worked with the legislature on is called the Arizona Healthy Forest Initiative. Doing more forest thinning, getting rid of that hazardous vegetation. And going back to the criminal justice piece, one of the best recidivism reducing programs we can have is training our folks who are incarcerated for jobs so that they can get them after their release. So we're putting 700 inmates out into some of the areas that need to be thinned, to have the hazardous vegetation removed, and hopefully it will result in, A, keeping our communities safer, reducing the severity of wildfires, but B, it's going to create a market, because there isn't one right now, to go into the forests and harvest with trained people who can start their own businesses and continue that work of clearing the forests. I don't know if there's...
Well, I do want to go back to the infrastructure. When you talk about the wildfire and water and what we've been doing, we did put $200 million into a water mitigation drought plan. 160 of that is going to be utilized, and there's going to be a committee set up at the end of this month, and it's going to be the governor and the House and the Senate will be choosing people from all over the state in every district of the state, and are all four corners, and including Maricopa County in the center. So we'll have somebody from every part of the state coming into this committee, but what they're going to do is determine how we can bring water in from outside the state. And 200 sounds like a lot of money. 200 million sounds like a lot of money. It's not when you're talking about bringing water in from out of the state. I mean, we don't know what we're going to be coming up with, what the plans are, if it's going to be desalinization, if it's going to be bringing it from the Midwest, if it's going to be bringing it from the Gulf of Mexico, how we're going to do this. But we've got to figure out a plan, because what we've seen, and you guys know this, is pilfering from some communities to benefit others. And that's not what we want to see. We also have 40 million in that 200 million that is going to be used for recharging, for projects that would be innovative as far as bringing water back into your own communities and being able to hold it. So that is a huge deal. And I know I've worked with Supervisor Bishop a lot on this one. And the federal government, I know, is going to be putting in some dollars too. And you and I have written several letters as far as trying to keep South Cove open. And I know they had a meeting this last week. We wrote a letter right before the meeting. We sent it to them. We're hoping that that $5.1 billion that's coming from the federal government will help keep us that area open, because it's supposed to be for keeping access in our parks. And so hopefully that's gonna just increase what we've already been trying to do. But we didn't get enough relief from the federal government. We had to start doing something ourselves. And that's what we did with that.
And we're going to be talking a bit more in a second about some of the parks investments, outdoor investments. But before we do that, I wanted to touch on public safety and veterans spending priorities. One of them is the deployment of the National Guard to the border. It is a very serious situation. Even President Biden's own administration has talked about the unsustainability of what is happening at the border. Senator Gowan, who is Representative Cobb's counterpart on the Senate Appropriations Chair, represents a legislative district that is on the border. And he has shared with us that his sheriff's office is reporting significant increases in drug trafficking. Fentanyl and heroin are way up. And the priority for us is to really address the criminal elements that are happening at the border. So we're deploying 250 National Guardsmen to help patrol border communities, to help our law enforcement officials out so that they can focus on other areas. And we're providing $25 million for that mission. But we're also providing $30 million to help county governments. That's where a lot of the stress is occurring. The sheriff's office and the jailing, the county attorney's office to prosecute, among other items. But you can really see strain on our local governments, and we're going to provide a reimbursement for those costs that are occurring as a result of the inaction from Washington, D.C.
And I know we're not a border community on the border of Mexico, but we do border California, we do border Nevada, Utah. We're seeing influx also. We just need some numbers to be given back to the state so we can help if we need some help in this area also.
Another initiative that we're doing is the Microwave Backbone Project. For those of you who've been following public safety for a while, you know that we need more towers in northern Arizona. County governments rely on it, local governments, the state police, our federal and tribal law enforcement officials rely on these radios, and we don't have that many towers, or some of the towers that we do have are outdated. So we're putting a $47 million investment to include 40 new communication sites throughout northern Arizona, so that when that law enforcement officer picks up the radio, they're going to be able to get through to dispatch and get help if needed.
Do you want to cover broadband on that too?
Absolutely, and I think that was one infrastructure piece that we overlooked, but it's going to be incredibly important. $100 million in broadband infrastructure grants, $75 million earmarked for the rural areas, $25 million for the urban areas, plus we're putting nearly $180 million of long-haul fiber conduit along I-17 between Anthem and Flagstaff, I-19 between Tucson and Nogales, and I-40 between Flagstaff and Havasu. And this is going to allow for more carriers to come in and compete, because the initial capital cost of putting in that conduit, it breaks these smaller companies. It's just not cost effective. And when the larger carriers who do have the capital evaluate whether they're going to make that investment, the population is not significant enough in their eyes in terms for getting a return on the investment. So we, the state, are taking care of the biggest capital cost, which is the long-haul fiber. More access, more reliability, more redundancy, and hopefully that will bring down the cost of broadband.
And the $100 million is for grants. And so any rural community or any rural broadband person can bring in with those grants. So we did 75 in rural, 25 for what we call urban underserved, which is some of the areas around in Phoenix, like Buckeye. You know, you get in certain areas and you just lose it. One thing we didn't do yet is 93, which is kind of okay for me right now because I get an hour of no time on the phone and I get some downtime while I'm traveling. So we'll get to that, but hopefully it's after my term in office.
And I do have to acknowledge this would not have been possible. So there's a financing piece for sure. But there is also a land use component to broadband connectivity. And Representative Cobb and some really innovative legislation that first started out with Mojave Electric Cooperative in creating innovative ways to address easements and whatnot, so that we can really streamline the process and lower the cost to get broadband access out to these very remote areas.
And we passed another bill this year on easements. And so we will be able to pay for the private person's easements. We'll be able to expand those easements. So those easements aren't just going to belong to private individuals that are doing private broadband, but it'll be easements that ADOT has. And so we'll be able to put that fiber into those areas that we weren't able to before.
The other public safety veterans piece is the Northwest Veterans Home. I know that's been an item on folks' list for a long time. We're finishing construction of the Flagstaff and Yuma Veteran Home. They're expected to be open next spring, and now a new study will commence to find where we should put a veteran home in Northwest Arizona. So Mojave County is going to be that spot.
And the Veterans Council has targeted Mojave County. They just don't know if it's going to be Kingman or Havasu. So they'll continue those studies, but it was important for us to put those dollars from the state was $25 million, I think, isn't it? $25 million into our, we had to take the investment so that the federal government can invest also. We've got to kind of pick the pace up for them to be able to pick the pace up. So we're going to see ours start real soon here.
And I think that's going to draw down about $55 million from the Fed based on the cost sharing arrangement. Moving into tourism promotion, money for county fair promotion, significant funding there. State parks, one of the areas that affects Mojave County perhaps more so than many other counties is access to what's called the State Lake Improvement Fund grant program. It's reliant on boat fuel
tax, yeah.
The fuel tax on fuel for boats is supposed to go into a fund, be used for lake projects. I know.
Yeah,
and was involved with that.
You know, that was something that someone brought to me back in 2015. I think it was Cheryl Williamson brought it to me back in 2015, and slowly but surely we've been trying to work on that. You know, this area, out of any area, knows how important these dollars are, because the Lake Improvement Fund helps with your boat ramps. It helps with your, your picnic areas that you have, but it also helps with your boats, keeping the safety boats out there on the water and personnel to go into that. So this year, and I think the help with Leo Biasucci, we were able to continue keeping the SLIF funds where they're supposed to be going and not taken off and used for another area of the Parks and Rec.
There were some additional investments. In Mojave County in particular, Cattail Cove State Park is getting funding for wastewater and baseline infrastructure, internet connectivity at Cattail Cove to make it an even more appealing spot. La Paz County, Buckskin Mountain State Park, and the River Island State Park are getting funding as well. But in addition to these state investments, the governor announced a $25 million investment, $20 million going to state parks throughout, and with an emphasis on wastewater and sewer infrastructure, but some other facilities improvements, et cetera. And then there's $5 million to be matched with a state contribution of $5 million for a total of $10 million for the Heritage Fund. And this is set aside for grants to preserve historic buildings, historic infrastructure, land preservation for open spaces. And we really haven't funded this as much since the Great Recession. I think there was $1 million investment.
That was over, I think, 2 years. We did $1 million. This year, we did 5 out of the general fund, but the governor took another 5 out of the ARPA funds and put it together with that. Hotel Brunswick is a prime example. That needed to be restored a long time ago. It's been sitting there. That's on the Heritage Fund list. That's one of the projects that's on the Heritage Fund list, and you guys know that. It's a beautiful building, but yet we haven't been able to do anything with it. So there are buildings all around Mojave County that are like that. They have a list like 2 pages long of 100 items that they could use funding for the Heritage Fund. So it's nice that we were able to put in those extra dollars this year to be able to start working on some of those projects that have been sitting pretty much dormant for a long time.
Now, shifting gears to education, my favorite topic. The governor has said every year that he's been in office that he's going to increase funding for schools above and beyond inflation costs and enrollment growth, and this year is no exception. This year is very unique in that the state funding, we were one of the few states that didn't cut education in the face of COVID-19. We saw other states just slashing education budgets. We didn't reduce it 1 penny. Not 1 penny. We actually accelerated some of the promises we made to schools in the form of restoring recession-era cuts to key parts of the K-12 funding formula, and the 20 by 2020 promise, which was to provide enough funding for schools, should they use that money for teacher salaries, to raise teacher salaries by 20%. So we carried through on that promise. This year marks a watershed moment, though. When you look at the per pupil funding on a state basis, if you look at it just in terms of normal dollars, or if you adjust for inflation, we are spending more per pupil in K-12 schools ever than in state history. We've heard about the 2008 watermark of the high watermark. We've heard about 2000. We've surpassed those. And we're on track to really setting a new course for how we fund education. But state resources aside, we fund about $6 billion. That's an annual state appropriation that we give for K-12 schools. In the last 12 months, the federal government has provided an additional $4 billion to schools. $4 billion.
That's K through 12, not through higher education, though.
None
That's
of it.
just K through 12.
Excludes K through 12.
Yeah.
Our schools are in the best cash position ever. Seriously. No smoke and mirrors here. They have more cash than they can spend in a given single year. And we've worked with the Auditor General, and they'll be putting out a report at the end of this year to figure out what schools are actually going to do with those funds to address a lot of the unfinished learning that occurred as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Also, infrastructure to the schools, the school facility board dollars that we've increased this year. Also, not only have we increased it each year. We've been increasing the school facility board, which is restorations to the schools, new schools. That's what the school facility board does. So every year we've been upping it. And if there's any need at all, we do a supplemental and add to it. So what we did this year was took that supplemental that we've always, if we had to add a supplemental to them in the past, we just took that as a lump sum, and that's what we took out of the general budget, and that's what we're going to do to give to the schools. Plus, the per square footage, we increased that about 60%, what they're going to get per square foot from what they had in prior years. And that did go retroactive to some of the schools that were already starting to be built, so that they got some extra funding for their schools also.
One thing that we have to emphasize is that a lot of schools have not taken advantage of the Building Renewal Grant Program, in part because it was very inefficient. It took a while to get things approved. Legislation that you worked on, Representative Cobb, helped streamline it. We got rid of a lot of the bureaucratic red tape so that we could get grants applications in and grant applications out. So to the extent that you have conversations with your school leaders, get those building renewal grants in, the roofs, the air conditioners. It covers a wide array of preventative maintenance and other important items that school facilities need. And the reset for the market rates so that we're building new schools at the market cost.
So if you hear that the state is not spending enough in resources right now, we've gone above our constitutional limit, be it what we're supposed to be paying schools. We're going to have to go back to do some legislation next year because we're paying them over what our constitutional limit is we can give at this, or that we could give the schools. So the expenditure limit is exceeded, and we will have to go back and do something either temporary or permanently with voters. We're not sure exactly where we need to go with that, but that's where we are at the state level, not counting the federal dollars. That counts zero of the federal dollars. We're just above that state dollars.
For higher education, we invested $2 billion this year in our normal course, but we did significant increases for NAU, ASU, U of A. We provided ongoing and one-time support. Representative Cobb mentioned back in 2015 when we were facing $1 billion deficit, we cut. We weren't going to raise taxes because we didn't think that was the right thing to do when our economy was so fragile. So we tightened the belt. Universities, unfortunately, were one of those areas where we cut. And in this budget, we were able to do a lot of restoration, but targeted investments in what they're calling the New Economy Initiative. Healthcare, mining, engineering.
Engineering, yes.
Really important job sectors that we need employees. Workforce is a major item there. Speaking of workforce, $28 million for our rural community colleges with $2.4 million in new funding from Mojave.
Yeah, and honestly, we have an innovation center a career innovation center that's being proposed out at the airport, and this will help give the college enough money to where they can invest in that innovation center. What I did here and what I heard from yesterday when I was over in Flagstaff was their Coconino County, their community college said, we couldn't have done it without Stacy Klippenstein because he came in first and gave a presentation on what we could do out there in the industrial park and did such a great presentation. The other community colleges says, we got to get on board. We got to do this too. If we want some funding, we got to get on board. So they all created presentations of the things that they needed, and every community college was individual of how they brought those to us. And when they brought it to me, they said, can you run a bill that would help us fund this? And I did, but I also brought it to the table when we were in our negotiations, and we were able to get that. And that's huge for our area because every department in industrial, in our mining, said, we do not have enough workforce. We've got to somehow create that. And guess what? Our community college is going to create that. Freeport came in yesterday and said, oh my gosh, I can't thank you enough. They weren't there. They were in Yavapai, I think, when we did the Yavapai presentation. And they said, we can't thank you enough for what you did for Mojave Community College because it's going to give us our workforce we need. So it is an important piece of the higher ed.
So if you've captured anything throughout this presentation, I think the word overwhelming. The session was overwhelming. This budget is overwhelming. There are many other components. And there, I think, has been a lot of energy around, I think Senator Gowan called it healing the state, certainly reversing some of the recessionary cuts. But more so than that, I think there was a focus on the future, a focus on what we want Arizona to be. And there is another budget that we have to do. For the governor's office, we have one more budget to propose. And
one more for me as the chairman of appropriations, because I'll be termed out also, because I went in at the same time. So we are asking you as our sounding board to bring us what you think we need to do. But we got to do it very quickly because we are going to start working on our budget this month, actually, at the end of this month, starting at the end of August. We're going to start in working with departments. And Matt's going to be hearing from him first. They usually go to him first before they come to me. And then I will be listening to the departments. But we also want to know out in the community what we are lacking and what we might have missed. Because like I said, we're still in a growth time right now, and we want to take advantage of the growth time that we do have. One of the things that we want to make sure that we have done, and the governor has said this from the beginning, is stabilize our economy, stabilize our budget. So in the case of a downturn, it's going to happen, but in case of a downturn, we are in such a great position that we don't have to worry about it.
so at this point, I think that concludes our presentation. And if you have any comments or any questions, now's a time to ask them, or we can chat after. But it's really important. I know this is very important to Representative Cobb, that we get out of the Capitol, that we get out of Maricopa County and hear from voices that have had a hard time being heard. And so we're happy to be here to hear from you. I think it was it's at 25% deduction, and we're increasing it. It'll eventually be 100%. It's going to increase every year. Right, we did not adjust that.
Right. Well, our laws don't go into effect until the 29th. So
our goal is to get the grant application out by early fall. We'd like to get grants awarded, try to get as many awarded as possible by the end of the year, so that when the legislature comes back to the session, they can see the fruit of their labor as they.
Which we want you to see the fruit of the labor too. So. And normally we have more time than this, because our session was so long. We're trying to condense this down. So getting the rules, getting it out there, getting the grant applications out there, it is really got to be streamlined now to make sure that we get it out there to everybody so they can get those grants. And the same with the rural broadband grants, same with our, any other grants that we have within the state. Once we post those, get them back to us quickly. Supervisor Bishop? I think Director Tobin had given me a map recently, and it showed where all the broadband is and where we're deficient in. It was a big hole in the middle of the state. I mean, it was like all around the edges, but nothing from the middle of the state, from Flagstaff all the way to the border, to the west border. And, you know, from what we were talking about, mile marker 175, I always tell people, talk to me quick, I'm going to lose you. Have mile marker 175. And we're hoping not to have that, but but we need to expand it. And having these highways, these major highways, 1740, 19, you're having all these highways that are going to do the major portion. Then with the grants, you can start interconnecting and start entwining into that. And so that's what we're hoping for, is that we start with these, get the major infrastructure in there, and then start the grants moving them to the center so that we don't see that big hole in the center.
And what we've seen with a number of other applicants is partnerships between municipalities and counties coming forward. I think actually Mojave Electric Cooperative
that's exactly
applied for a broadband grant. But I feel like there's a lot of energy around that, certainly with what we've put in to the budget, but the infrastructure package that is moving through the Congress right now has significant resources. And you know, we have a statewide broadband office that we just set up 3 years ago. Prior to that, there was no statewide entity. And they've been very focused on engaging with the local communities to kind of map out where you want that middle mile and last mile to connect to the long haul fiber along I-40.
And I got to tell you, this is a couple of things with this $100 million. One, the governor's doing this with the ARPA dollars. When we were doing the budget, and I just can't be more thankful for this, they brought those dollars to the table as we were negotiating our budget. So things that we felt like we had to cover, but it could be covered with the ARPA dollars, we were able to shift those over, and they were more than willing to take on that. And then bipartisanship on this, on broadband, I mean, we had the Navajo Nation in, Diego Espinosa was doing a bill for the underserved urban, and then Representative Osborne did a bill for 75 of the rural area. So you had a true partnership, true bipartisanship in saying, let's get more broadband out there. But we'll take that down, Jean, and I will look at that, and that's something that we can look at also for next year. That's what we're asking for, is some input on things that we haven't looked at, and we haven't looked at the open range law. I think Gail Griffin had something on the open range law this year, though, but I'll have to go back and look at it. Okay, all right. And maybe you could help me with the language on tweaking that. Okay. Any other questions? Well, thank you for those of you who did come today. We appreciate that. And we will be around for questions after. And you can always contact us. I mean, we just wanted to get out into the communities, like I said, and let you know what has happened this year and how we've progressed and what we need to do to be able to move forward.
Thank you for coming.
You.